We've been building our 40 by 60 Barndo on our homestead for the past year, and I've been making so many mistakes. I'm going to share with you all of the mistakes that I've made along the development process. If you're thinking about building your own house or developing some land, this video is going to be extremely valuable for you. You can learn from the tens of thousands of dollars of mistakes that I've made. It's literally been tens of thousands of dollars. I don't want to add it up because it is painful to think about how much money I've made in mistakes. So I'm going to tell you all of the process here. This video is going to be a little bit longer than usual, but I promise you I'm only going to put content in here that is going to be valuable, that will help you to save money. If I was you, I'd probably save this video because chances are along the building process you're going to be going through these different steps. Depending on where you are, there's going to be things that you need to do along the way. So first thing we're going to do is start off with the very beginning. Let's get into this. So me and my family moved out of California. We moved into our RV and onto our land so that we could build our homestead. We traveled around for a little bit to find places that we liked. If you're interested in any of that, check out these videos that talk about that. But along doing that and in doing that, we decided to develop a piece of raw land. This land is completely raw. There was nothing here whatsoever. We did have power down on the bottom, and that brings me to the first part of building and developing, is buying the land. And there was definitely mistakes that I made in buying the land. When you go to buy land, and if you're looking at land, you're going to usually find a few things. You're going to see how big it is, you're going to see where it's at, what kind of services or amenities it has, and there's a few things that you absolutely have to do. Number one, if the power says that there's power on the property, that doesn't mean that you have a panel. That means that there is probably a pole or some kind of a just power pulled to somewhere on the property. There's usually no transformers. There's usually nothing there. And so having power on the property, that's good because you don't have to bring power out, which would be incredibly expensive, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be expensive. We were very, very lucky. Let me explain. All the way at the bottom of our property, all the way down there, is a power pole. So while there is power on the corner of the property, to get power up to our panel would have been incredibly expensive because it's about 350 feet of either overhead lines where we have to put in power poles, and that's extremely expensive, or you have to dig and put them in. So if you have power on the property, you need to know how much it's going to cost to get it to your build site and how much is the power company going to pay. If you can put your house next to the power supply, you're going to save a lot of money because that's beneficial. A few things that you have to take into consideration for that is where is your well location going to be, and then also where will your septic or sewer be so that you can connect into that, because you have to coordinate all of those services so that you can have that in your house. And you typically don't think about that stuff, especially if you're coming from the city like we were, where we didn't have to think about that. The person that we bought this property from hadn't done anything. He said, I haven't done anything at all. I haven't tried to build it. Nothing was going on. We ended up finding out that he had actually done perk tests on the property and dug holes to see what he could do for septic, and he didn't disclose any of that stuff. So if a buyer is telling you if a seller is telling you things and you're looking at buying, you 100% need to verify everything. So make sure that you call the county, that you understand what the permitting process is, understand what permits you need, and also how much they cost to get them. This was the power pole that we actually pulled from, and there's our panel. So it actually didn't cost us anything. Usually a utility company will have an allotment that they are willing to pay towards somebody setting up a new service. So this is a different power company than the faraway pole that I showed you down there, and so it ended up not costing us anything, which was fantastic. That was the only thing that didn't cost us money, and that ended up being really lucky. What we ended up having to do was get an easement from our neighbor. That is actually on our neighbor's lot. He said no problem. We ran a little pipe but 6 inches over, and it was a great thing for us. For your other utilities, you're going to need either a well or city water and a septic. So with our well and our septic, definitely made mistakes there. The first thing that I did is that before we actually ended up closing on our property, I didn't dig any perk tests or do any kind of calling to the city. I just assumed, okay, we have a piece of land, we're going to be able to put a septic system on there. That wasn't the case. There are situations where you can't put septic systems on. What they do is they test the ground to see how quickly the water absorbs. This is called a perk test. And so in order to get the clearance to do a septic system, you have to know how long the leach field has to be, all these different things. They put all these calculations together to understand how big the system is going to be. So I looked initially going in, I thought, okay, the average cost for a septic system in Idaho at the time that we were building was about $6,700 to $7,500. I'll just go on the high end and expect $7,500. Well, guess what we have on our property all over? We got all these beautiful basalt rocks. Look at them. Aren't they gorgeous? You have these huge boulders here all over the place on our property. So many rocks. So since there's so many rocks, it's a problem for a few reasons. Number one, you need bigger equipment to move boulders. Any kind of excavation work, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second, is going to be made more difficult because you have large rocks that smaller excavators can't handle. So that's number one. Number two, we have so much standing water around here because there's a layer of rock below the surface. We have about 18 inches of soil, and then we have solid rock. What that means is that the water does not disperse very easily and slowly, and our system is huge. In fact, we have the biggest septic system in our entire county because our ground does not take water well. It is huge, okay? Was not expecting that, was not even thinking about that. I thought a septic system is a septic system is a septic system. Not true whatsoever. So instead of planning on $7,500, I want to say we were about $17,000 for our septic system, which is incredibly expensive. But it was made even more expensive because all of those beautiful rocks that we have, we had to bring dirt in. So we had to end up actually bringing in a ton of gravel to put on here because we had to build our system up. I'll talk about that in a second. In addition to all of that gravel, right here is our leach field. Our leach field is 240 feet long. We have a 1,000-gallon septic tank right there and a 240-foot leach field. With this thing, they had to bring in topsoil to cover on top because they couldn't backfill with our really, really rocky soil. If they were to use the rocky soil, you can take a look here. We just have boulders in all over the place. It would actually crush the leach field with that backfill. So the leach field is not as strong, and you cannot use rocky soil like we have. So in addition to building out and designing this complex system, we also had to bring in all kinds of soil. And that is dump trucks and excavators and additional work that you wouldn't have to do otherwise. And I didn't know that. So if you're thinking about a septic system, make sure that you get out and at least you understand what it's going to be all about when it comes to your costs, your time frames, and things like that. Make sure that you dig a perk test before you close so that you know from the city what it's going to be. That leads me to the next thing, is that when you are building, you're going to want to make sure that you understand the permit process. If you don't want to be boondocking on your property without any hookups, you're going to need three things. You're going to need power, water, and electric. To get electric, we had to have a septic permit, and that was it. When we had electric, then we could use our well and get water. So everything revolved around getting that septic permit. And the first perk test holes that they were digging, they actually couldn't find any soil suitable for a septic system. We did get really lucky and actually found a hole that the previous owner had dug and not told us about, and it was deep enough and it worked. So we got really, really lucky. But I was very nervous because the inspector said, there's nothing that we can do. And I was like, are we gonna be able to put a tank and have it pumped, or what can we do? And he was like, there's nothing you can do. So we almost bought an expensive piece of land that we couldn't have a septic system on. And that sounds crazy. I didn't even think that was a possibility. It's a possibility. You have to be prepared for that. So I mentioned electric right now. I mentioned septic. The next thing that you need to move onto your land if you're going to boondock, or not boondock, but hook up your RV like we did, or at least you need water power and sewer to get things going, but you needed a well. This is our wellhead, and inside this wellhead we have a submersed pump down there at the bottom. This well goes down 240 feet. The cost that comes with wells are all about how deep you have to go. You need more casing and you need more drilling, so they charge you by the foot. If you're getting a well, make sure that you talk to local well drillers. They're going to know the area. It's going to be all documented so that you know your neighbors and things. I wasn't expecting to go this deep. They had to go about 60 feet deeper than they were expecting, that they told me they thought they would need to go. But we got great pressure and we were very lucky. With wells, you just don't know sometimes. There's no way to tell for sure until you drill. So always go up and above and beyond kind of what you're thinking it's going to be, just as a safe estimate. They should be able to tell you exactly what your cost per foot is, though. That way you'll know what your neighbors did, and just give yourself maybe a 20%, 25% buffer, because that way you won't be surprised at all. On top of that, you have additional costs. You need your well pump, you need a pressure tank, and all of the switches, components, and things like that. So you're going to need an electrical system that has your pressure switch, your pump solenoid that makes the pump turn on, and it also has to be in 220. So there's a lot of pumps I think that are 120. Ours is 220, so it's a higher voltage and requires more amperage than most circuits inside of a house. So that's a little bit more expensive. When I was looking at the cost of a well, it was actually, and I was trying to price estimate, it was only giving me the cost to drill it, not to put all the equipment. So for our well, it was about $6,500 for the drilling, and then it was about another $6,500 to have the well company come out, build our pressure tank, our systems, run the lines to where our shop was going to be, and that kind of stuff. So that was actually about double what I was expecting. I don't think I got ripped off by any means. It's just what it's cost, but I wasn't expecting it. So now that we talked about water, power, and sewer, there's a few things that I think you need to know about site prep and road building, because if you're buying a piece of land like we did, you're going to need a road and a place to build your shop. So our shop here, we actually have a lumber mill behind us. We built this shop as a temporary house. We're actually going to build a stick frame house on the top of this hill over here. It's got beautiful views too, but we wanted a shop house that was the front half a workshop, the back half a house. I mentioned that because the placement that we chose was in the back corner, which was close to our power pole, it was close to our well, and then we could put the septic in a place that was pretty convenient. I think the other thing that's kind of good about this is it's in between our shop and where we're going to be building our next house. So that's why we put this placement here. But having put this placement here, we are at the top of a hill. I'm going to show you the bottom of our hill. So our road and site prep took 600 tons of gravel. We put pit run on the bottom and then finished gravel on top. And after talking to some other people, we used a much too expensive gravel for the top layer. And people have said, you shouldn't have done that. It was a waste of money. It's just going to get absorbed into the ground and you're not going to notice it. So before you just take the recommendation and buy the most expensive thing, definitely talk to a few people. It leads me to my next point. If you're in the country like we are, it's difficult to find people. Everybody uses flip phones for the most part. There's not like websites and all kinds of things. So a good place to find contractors is to go to the local hardware store. There's almost always a hardware store in town. We have 2 building supply stores in town, and they have boards with business cards, and you can ask for referrals because it's hard to find people, and it's mostly about who you know, not so much finding them. Okay, so this is the bottom of our hill. We wanted it to be big enough so that we could pull an RV up, and then if you look up the hill here, it's about an 8% grade. We didn't want to go much steeper than an 8% grade because it would be pretty tough to pull our 5th wheel up. So with all of that, the excavator that we used, we were initially he suggested that we do a much longer road. This makes sense. Anytime that you have a contractor and you say, what do you think we should do? I'll tell you what he's going to tell you. We're going to probably do the most expensive, most work possible. So initially we drew up a plan that the road was going to wrap all the way across the property, cut around, and go at a very natural slope. He said that we should do this for a few reasons. Number one, we have to have at least 25 feet of level ground before we can actually start a pitch to the road. So it can't have a grade until 25 feet in. But here's the thing. This road right here, which is our road that we have as an easement with all of the other lot owners around us, the other landowners, this is not a county maintained road. So that means that the highway department in our town doesn't have any jurisdiction over our land and road. There's no actual requirements here. We can make it as steep as we wanted to. So we didn't have to do that. So we opted, and thank goodness my wife wanted to do this. She just wanted to do a straight run. She didn't want to cut our land up and use all of it for basically putting a road through it. It would have been 4 times longer for this road. And at the time, they quoted us $7,500 to do that. So we were actually able to get a shorter, more direct road and have less work. Here's the thing though. Whenever you have contractors, they're going to typically, this is the relationship that you have with the contractor. First thing, you meet them, everything sounds great. You're in the honeymoon phase. They give you quotes. It looks good. They come out, they start doing the work. Things are looking good. Work's getting done. You're seeing stuff happen. Then usually they're like, well, we should really bring out this thing, and we should bring out this thing, and we should do this. We need a land mover, and we need more dump trucks, and we need, and then they start adding more. So there was a few things that I did that were incredibly wrong here with this. Number one is I didn't get anything in writing that was in the changes. So I was working with a subcontractor for a company here, and I didn't get anything in writing. That was dumb on my part. So he said, hey, we need a land mover out here, but you know, the cost is basically the same as the excavator to run. Let's get that out here. And we needed to upgrade the excavator because we found the boulders, and we needed more dump trucks to get them the material that they needed more quickly. All of these things. So instead of taking 10 days like we had expected, it only took 3 days for them to cut the road and do the site prep. And you'd say, wow, they really cut down the time that they took. Less material, less everything. It should be way less expensive. The quote that we got was for $7,500. The bill that they sent us was for $21,000. They billed us not only for the time that the equipment was being used, they also billed us for the time the equipment was being stored on our property, per day, per piece of equipment, even though it wasn't being run. It was pretty darn shady, in my opinion. And so I called and I negotiated. I said, I'm not trying to rip you off. I'm not trying to do anything that is, you know, unethical here. I just want to pay what's fair, because we did a much smaller job, much less scope of work, less material, everything, and it's 4 times as much. This is ridiculous. So we ended up able to get it reduced down. We still had to pay, I believe, $14,000. So it was almost double of what we were expecting with the smaller road. And that's on my part. If you're going to get any changes, especially by the person who's not the owner of the company, the guy that was doing our excavation was a really nice old guy, and I think he was really trying to be helpful. And that was the problem. I was very trusting of him because he was always calling people, helping, and doing stuff. But he wasn't the owner of the company. He didn't have the authority to say, we're doing this change order. It's going to be less work for us, so it's not going to be an additional cost. We just got everything added up. And they actually bid out our septic system too at the end there, and they said it was going to be $64,000 for our septic system, which was crazy. So make sure that you have everything in writing. If there's a change, get a confirmed amount, and don't try to just be agreeable and cool to make friends with people. I'm definitely more of an agreeable person, and so I'll be like, yeah, no problem, sounds great, trying to be nice and things. When you're doing any kind of work, it's not the time to be nice. I'm not saying that you have to be rude or be a jerk, but it has to be clear expectations. How long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost? What is the change? And I need that in writing. That's how it has to be. Otherwise, you're going to end up like me, paying double for your road and your site prep. But make sure too that in your due diligence that you find out, is your road being connected to a county maintained road? Are there going to be additional requirements and permitting? Because that's going to also be a cost. If the county was out here, we would have had to do some kind of a 25-foot basically off ramp here that would then it would have made this road much more steep, which wouldn't have worked out for us. On top of that too, we'd have probably had to add a few culverts and gotten some pretty significant inspections. So, and ended up lucking out there on that one. With the site prep, I mentioned that we have rock. Our excavator said, hey, let's go all the way down to the rock. It's going to be super solid to run and put your slab onto. So he went down as deep as he could with the excavator that he had, which was a 320. That's a big boy for sure, right? It's a big excavator. And he went all the way down to the rock. It was beautiful site prep. I mean, it looked really good. It had nice finished gravel on it. It was ready to go. But here's the thing. We had to get our septic system out from underneath there. And when he went down to the rock, that caused a major problem for us, because you need at least a quarter or an eighth, depending on the code in your area, of drop per 10 feet, so that the waste will go out of your septic system. So gravity feeds your septic system, and you have to have it go down into your septic tank. So he went all the way down. The only way for us to get further down was to do basically blasting or try to figure out something creative. We ended up having to figure out something creative, and we were able to just sneak by. We had the right amount of drop, barely, with running our septic system on top of the ground, which is crazy. So I mentioned that we had all of this gravel. This is our septic line to our tank here. And so we had to bring in all this gravel. That was more dump trucks, more excavators, and more cost. And it wouldn't have had to been if we had just built up instead of going all the way down to rock. So the site prep that you do, make sure that you have all of your trades consulting each other so that you're not putting yourself into a corner where you're either gonna have to bring in dynamite and blast out spots so that you can get the depth that you need, or, you know, figure something else out, because it's difficult to know. And it wasn't our excavator's fault. He didn't realize or think about it. He's an excavator, he builds roads, he doesn't do septic systems. So make sure that you're getting advice from the trade that's going to do it and not somebody else. Because I don't think he had any ill intent. He was just trying to give us the best product. But at the end of the day, it made it a lot more difficult. So let's talk about the slab now. That's the foundation of your property. You can either build up and do retaining walls. You can build a slab. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. We ended up going with the slab. We wanted a 4-inch slab with 18-inch footings so that we'd have, that's what we needed based on the steel building that we were putting in. The slab that you're going to put is going to depend on the materials that you choose, your building materials, and the requirements that they are going to have based on those building materials. We had to follow, so this steel building is engineered. You can get engineered plans from steel building companies if you're going to buy the project from them. If you're buying a kit that's pre-built, ours was a kit. If you're getting a steel building put up and welded up by some steel building erectors, they're not going to engineer it, so they're going to have to pay engineering on top of that. So it depends on where you get your steel building from, is how you're going to figure that out. But with ours, we had a quote, and we're going to pay $420 a yard for concrete. And that's actually way, way more than anywhere you look online when it tells you how much concrete is. So we were building last year in 2021. We got our concrete poured in the fall of 2020, and prices were just starting to skyrocket. I called several different places to get quotes on things. You can actually call, if you look up most of the concrete places that have trucks and things that your concrete contractors will use, will sell direct to consumers. And you can do that if you want to pour it yourself. Obviously you have to know about mixes, and there's just a lot of complexity to that, and I didn't have the expertise for that, so I didn't want to do that myself. But they did site prep, they got everything ready, and so I had the concrete company, which is the same company that did our septic, came out and did our concrete. He bid us for $420 per yard, and we were planning on doing a 4-inch slab, again with 18-inch footings, which is so deeper in the middle. So what they do is they bring in forms, and then they fill in the middle with gravel, and then they put rebar in there to get everything tied up and tied together. The thing that cost me a lot of money and was wasted money was that the concrete company, the owner of the company, who was really nice and he was very knowledgeable, he came out and he got the job set up, and then his guys did it. When they came to pour, he was at another bigger job managing that, and his guys were out here. Well, his guys didn't put enough gravel in, and instead of using 24 yards of concrete, I think we used 33 yards of concrete. So we got a much thicker slab than we were planning on, which is, I guess, great. I mean, I can go put in a big tractor inside my garage now. I don't know. We ended up having to pay for that, and so it was substantially more, as you can imagine. I believe it was 12 grand more than we were expecting, because it was almost twice as much, or it was almost half as much of the concrete extra than we were planning on in total. So if you are getting any kind of slab done, you want to make sure that you know how many yards of concrete you're going to get. This should be a calculation that they know and figure out. There shouldn't be any guesswork with it. You need, I mean, obviously there's going to be wiggle room because it's not a perfect science, but they should be able to tell you how much. You shouldn't get an extra 50% above. If you see a pile of gravel sitting there, you need to make sure, hey, that gravel's sitting over there. Gravel is cheap. Concrete is extremely expensive. There was piles of gravel sitting around our site, and so that was not fun, and that was an extremely expensive mistake that we made. So if you're thinking of building a steel building like we did, I was initially thinking, okay, this is going to take about a week to build. I don't know where I came up with that. I saw a lot of guys that were steel building erectors talk about it, and they said it takes about a week. We had terrible weather, we had tons of wind, and it was difficult to figure out. Since I've built my shop, there have been some video series that come out that teach you how to do steel buildings. I'm going to link to that in the description. I watched these just recently. They would have been so helpful. It would have saved me so much time, so much headache, and I would have gotten a better product at the end because I would have known what I was doing. So, if you're building your own steel building and if you're going to be putting it up yourself, it's going to take longer than you expect. I was expecting a week, and it took 3 weeks. That extra time is actually cost because you have rentals of equipment that you do. That's very expensive. You have rentals of any tools that you have or specialty things that you're going to use. With that, we needed a telehandler, we needed a lift, and sometimes if you can get a scissor lift, that's something to get for sure because that'd be helpful. But anytime you have longer construction times, it's going to be more expensive because the rental of those items. Rental costs are super, super expensive. That's another thing too. When you have a rental company that is going to drop stuff off like we did, we actually had them scheduled for a date. They called us, I think 4 or 5 days early, and they said, hey, we're coming out to the area. Would it be all right if we just dropped this off? I said, sure. I thought it was making it easier for them. They actually tried to charge us for the extra time that it was there. And we said, hey, we didn't use it extra. We didn't request it extra. You just wanted to get more deliveries done in less time. We saved you money. And so they tried to get us to pay an extra 5 days on all of the equipment, which was, I think, $3,000. They were trying to charge us per day for both of those items. So they were trying to get us to pay an extra $3,000. We should have had it in writing. We're dropping this off early. However, we're not planning on using it. We're not going to be charged extra. If they say something like that, get it in writing. They actually tried to send it to collections. It was such a hassle. And I would continue to call them. A lot of the nationwide rental places, they don't have great customer service, and they just will send you to a call center, and so it doesn't get resolved. So big headache and a lot of extra money. So that's, I think, really, really important to think about. Any kind of equipment rentals that you're doing, probably expect that it's going to take twice as long as you think, just as a rule of thumb. Like, that's going to be probably a pretty good rule. Let's talk about building materials. Right now, the price of building materials is incredibly volatile. Make sure that you budget for increases in prices. When we bought our lumber, it was the most expensive time in history. I would expect this summer we're going to have another spike in prices. I've seen skyrocketing costs of 2x4s already, but expect that your lumber cost is going to go up. Your copper cost is going to go up. Anything that uses natural resources due to inflation is just going to go up. The only exception would be that if the housing market crashes and people stop buying stuff, maybe there's extra supply and maybe the prices go down. But I wouldn't expect that under any circumstance. We, spent, I think, right around $18,000 on lumber that normally in a normal market would probably cost about $6,300. That was expensive. That was unexpected, and there was nothing that we could do about it. Each one of these sheets of OSB I spent $142 on, right? That's wild to me. The normal price for something like that is $32 in an old market, right? I guess there's no such thing as an old market anymore, but everything is more expensive. Everything. We didn't have to deal with contractors putting this stuff up. We did it ourselves. But again, anytime you have contractors, get everything in writing. Any change order, get it in writing. Don't pay all the money up front because that doesn't incentivize them to come and finish the job. I've grown up in construction family and saw how a lot of contractors did work. There's good contractors out there, but there's also a lot of shady contractors. With the shady contractors, you have to give them incentive to come back. So they're always going to be asking for more money, more draw, get paid as quickly as possible. And sometimes they are juggling jobs where they're trying to get money to finish that job so that they can get on to the next job. And definitely not the best business practices, but it happens all the time. So be careful. You want to make sure everything is in writing. Don't pay up all in front, and make sure that you have clear expectations and clear communication. I think if you get a contractor who doesn't call you back, doesn't pick up, that's definitely a problem. You got to have somebody who's always calling you back, and I mean within reason, but have clear expectations of how often they'll show up, when they'll be done by, and what happens if they don't, because that's definitely an expense. Everything is going up in terms of pricing, whether it's materials or labor. So that's really, really important to think about and consider. I don't even know what I would suggest for budgeting, because I mean, we spent way more than we had ever expected on lumber and on copper and on basically everything. So not only is it more expensive to get, but it takes longer to get. Our windows just came in a month ago. We got them delivered. We obviously don't have windows on the outside of the house because it took forever. It took 6 months extra to get them made and sent out. There's different items like that just take longer. And if you're going to get it to take longer, it's going to take more time to get everything else built out, which is going to probably be more labor for you. Right here I have some 2x4s. When you buy lumber, by the way, this is, I think, really, really important. When you buy lumber, you're going to get a truck offloading a ton of lumber. Make sure, number one, that you price shop your lumber. A lot of local building supply stores will have very different prices. The prices were crazy different. Say, here's what I want, here's what I'm looking for, what is the best price you can do? Get at least 2 or 3 quotes and compare those to each other, because they're going to want to work for your business, number one. And then number 2 is when you get lumber showing up, there's going to be so much junk lumber in there. I can't tell you how much junk lumber showed up. It just is like unusable beams that have curves that are, wild, insane level of curves. So there's just that level of boards, especially if you're getting longer boards, 12 footers or 16 footers. Make sure that they're straight, make sure they're appropriate. I got a delivery of lumber that I built a goat milking stand with, and there was literally termite damage. This stuff had to have been 5 years old. It came from Home Depot. I couldn't believe how bad the lumber quality was. If you get that, make sure that you understand, be sure to say, hey, if the lumber is not good quality, what can I do? Is it going to be able to switch it out for better stuff? How can we work on this? That's really, really important to say. The other thing, too, is I found the same thing with drywall. So we got, I think, 240 sheets of drywall delivered, and the quality in drywall sheets was wild. There'd be some really old sheets in there that were broken out and stuff. Make sure that you have expectations. If we're getting a delivery and some of it's not useful, or some of the stuff that they put off the truck with the forklift, if they break it, what's going to happen to that? Because you shouldn't just eat that cost. And especially with how expensive stuff is, you want to make sure that you're getting good stuff. So if you're trying to save money and do things on your own, a few areas that I think are pretty simple to do. It's pretty darn easy to plumb your own house with PEX. It's pretty darn easy to create a PEX manifold and get everything out there. Probably one of the easier things that I did. I created a video on that if you go look here. Also talked about framing the house, how hard that was to do on our own. I have a background in electrical, so electrical was the thing that I'm best at, so that wasn't hard for me to do on my own because this is a simple residential setup. So far we've done everything with the exception of putting in our slab, our site prep, and I do think now, having run telehandlers and other heavy equipment, I do think I could have done my own site prep and everything. It wouldn't have been that hard to do. Definitely glad that I had somebody do the septic system because I didn't have any experience with that. But I did all of my own plumbing and drain pipes and vent pipes. I did the electrical, I did the framing, I did the drywall, the texturing, and the mud. So I didn't have to deal with contractors along each one of those steps. I will say though, having done drywall now and mud, I 100% would suggest subcontracting that out. That is the worst job ever. If you are a mud and texture person or a drywall hanger, hats off to you because you're amazing. So there are just some jobs that are not so fun that maybe you don't want to do. So totally up to you. But make sure that you're actually getting everything in writing. I can't state how important that is. Make sure that everybody has really clear expectations. Don't try to be agreeable just to get the job. And make sure that you're really not being taken advantage of, that you're going to be on it, asking questions the whole time, and not just accepting what they give you. I hope that makes sense. I hope this was helpful. If I have any other tips for you, If I have any other tips for you, I'll be sure to make another video here, but I think those are the big ones, and hopefully this saves you tons and tons of money. If you found this useful, be sure to subscribe, and have a great day.